All right, now I'm ready to turn it over to Sienna Williams, and who will be speaking with Margaret Urich about diversity inclusion, and kind of with a focus on what we're seeing and doing and what our members are doing. So, Sienna.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Let me get my slides shared.
And while you're doing that, Tiana, I'll just say hi to everybody. I, for the most part, probably know all of you, but I am Margaret Urich, the Managing Director for Talent Development and Coaching. And I'm here to support Tiana with this presentation. She and I are really managing the DE and I space here for MEA, and just a lot of great stuff to share with you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Can you see my slides okay? Are they in the correct mode? Awesome.
They're in the correct mode, you're good.
Thank you. Yes, so we're so happy to get to chat with you again for just a few minutes to give you kind of a diversity and inclusion update, a sort of summary of what some of the hot issues are in this space in 2021 for many employers. And as Margaret said, we've been speaking with a number of members. It's great to get sort of our finger on the pulse of what's happening with our members when it comes to these issues. And then honestly, to see that it really reflects what's happening around the country for many organizations of various sizes, sort of accepting out the super large corporations that are kind of in their own world doing their own thing on DEI. And that's certainly, if anyone's interested to hear about that, a conversation we could have as well. But so what we're hearing, we continue to learn new lessons from things that have changed during the pandemic, right? So we've had a number of members who have been open and operating because they've been essential through this entire time. That's wonderful, and there have been many lessons learned from that as well. But in the area of remote work, so those businesses that had to switch to fully remote operations during this time, there have been some sort of unique what were challenges that I think some folks have really turned into opportunities in terms of how they do their hiring, and how that really aligns with some of their business goals, and it turns out also DEI goals, whether they, unbeknownst to them at the start. So let me put that in real context. So we've heard from a number of companies that say, look, we had to switch to fully remote hiring, which honestly was a challenge to start with, right? To interviewing, identifying candidates has been largely remote, but sort of interviewing them, putting them through that hiring process and selection process remotely. And one of the things that's come out of it is some folks have been able to really insert sort of some additional objectivity and process into their interviewing process, because they had managers and those who are typically involved being a little more willing to kind of hear what should we do here, right? What process should we follow when it comes to remote interviewing and talking to folks in this way? I'm not used to it. So HR and senior leaders were able to inject and insert some more objectivity in that process. It also has given members the opportunity to cast a wider net, right? To not be limited geographically to this area directly in their space, right? In their physical space. They can look farther. They can look at a wider radius to try and identify the best candidate. And one member even shared that they did a lot of phone interviews. They weren't big on you have to have your camera on, with cameras on, at all times. No, they did a lot via phone because they were doing a lot of phone conferencing prior to the pandemic, right? So they carried that practice over into their interviewing, and they ended up hiring some folks who were, they thought, absolutely based on their skills, their interviews, their experience would be great fits. And it turns out when they got a glimpse of them, they maybe didn't look like they were expecting. And I'm not even talking about race and gender here. I'm talking about tattoos, different colored hair, some things that previously they had thought, we can't have this in our workspace. Maybe they felt it just wasn't in line with their standards. And these individuals have been great hires for them. And I just find that to be really just a powerful anecdote for us all to kind of think about, right? It doesn't mean we change everything about what we're doing, but what can we learn from that? That they have made some really great additions based when they really were focusing on those sort of the real things that matter for that person being a good fit and contributing to your organization. So again, something to think about. Maybe widening that geographic scope of where you're looking for potential candidates allows you to hire even better talent, right? Someone who's an even better fit for that role and get even more out of sort of the person in that position, right? So again, it's just something to think about. And that aligns directly with the DEI concepts, right? Of let's hire the best candidate for the job, regardless of these protected characteristics. And let's make sure we're looking at a large enough group where we're capturing potential candidates, potential diverse candidates. Oh, I'm just checking in on my chats
And
and things.
Tiana, to that point, and talking about what we're hearing, this is a request that we're hearing from a lot of the members that we are speaking with. And this is an area where they really do want to start when they think about how they can address their DE&I initiatives. And many of them want to look at their hiring process and their recruiting process and figure out how they can adjust those so that they are getting having a wider pool to pull from, and that they are able to change the numbers that they're hiring. So it's great to hear this.
Absolutely. And we had a comment, and I appreciate that. I encourage people, type in any questions, comments. Someone shared the opposite position would be many employees can't make that transition to the virtual work environment. And I'd say that's right. You have a mixed group, and that's why I think you see even in this time period, right, where many of us are pushed to remote work, hybrid work environments. And I've heard from members outside of the DEI context, right, just in the employment law context, saying, what should we be considering? Because we've decided we're going to be hybrid going forward, meaning we will have some employees, and maybe they are these key what have become key employees that are outside their normal geographic area. We're going to keep them on as virtual, but we're going to have a number of people in person where those folks work best. So that is absolutely a consideration.
Well, and Tiana, the other point I wanted to just add there to what Mike is saying is that even if you're not able to be virtual, there are lessons learned from those of our members that have gone virtually and have had to change things, and then the results that they saw as a result of changing how they did their hiring. And so even if you're still working in your office and you haven't gone virtual, everyone's still coming on site, maybe there are some things you can learn from those that have adjusted, and you just change your process just because it's going to give you different results. So it's a kind of a lessons learned thing.
Exactly. And I absolutely think those lessons learned go, like you're saying, Margaret, go both ways, right? And we can always learn from sort of whenever someone has to adapt to this this kind of significant change business-wise, there are going to be lessons that can be learned and shared and used even outside of that context. I think it's pretty awesome. And then customer and client demands. I shouldn't say demands. I should say requests and inquiries, perhaps. We've had... Oh, this is great. Someone's encouraging folks to share in the chat. I love that. So we've also had some members say, look, we're going to be submitting a proposal. We've seen some either requests for information or requests for proposals that are asking, what are you doing within your workforce to address diversity and inclusion? I think when you look at that big picture, we've got to think back some years when, like I said, larger corporations are sort of out there doing their DEI work and sort of marching right along with it, which is fantastic. They have a lot of they're able to pool their resources, right? They have over 100,000 employees many times, and really have a lot at stake when it comes to their reputation. I was actually listening in on a webinar recently, and someone from one of these organizations with 100,000 plus employees, I won't identify them specifically in case they didn't want their comments kind of shared in that way, but they said, look, based on our data, our reputation, about half of our reputation depends on this, depends on how we respond and how we address diversity and inclusion. And that reputation is a big part of our market value, right? So they have sort of all these other considerations that really prompt them to focus heavily on diversity and inclusion for a number of years now. Many of them are at the phase of actually now looking outward at the communities in which their organizations exist. As a result of that, what's happening at that macro level, I think they are seeing the results of those efforts, and they are seeing more people of color, more gender diversity, more diversity around sexual orientation and LGBTQ status in their leadership and senior ranks. And then when you when they are purchasing or asking for things from other organizations, right? Using vendors, selecting vendors, this becomes an issue that these individuals want to hear about. Much like, you may encounter within workforces, people inquiring about these issues, but on a much larger scale, right? Also, the federal government, right? Sort of has a lot of spending power and often is focusing heavily on these things. Particularly, federal contractors have seen and are expecting an increased focus on diversity and inclusion. So, in responding to RFPs and things along those lines, being able to explain sort of where you are on your DEI journey and what you're doing. Can be tremendously helpful and at least keep you in competition, hopefully help you land it, right? Land that business.
So Sienna, real quick before you continue, just a quick question that we had put in Q&A, and it was again regarding the virtual hiring and broadening, right, looking at a wider geographic area. So the member is saying if you have 10 employees working virtually in 10 different states, you have 10 workers' comp laws, wage and hour laws, etc. She's asking, is there any word on whether or not this might be addressed at the federal level?
Wow. Yeah, I do think that the entire sort of pandemic situation where so many organizations, even some organizations just by virtue, of having to go virtual, all of a sudden we're covering 5 different states, right? They all of a sudden had employees when they go home to New Jersey, go home to Delaware, go home to New York, working in all these different states. And I think if we had sort of a smooth, well-oiled machine in our government, there probably would be something happening to provide some consistency for employers. But I don't know that we're exactly on the cusp of that happening. It would be tremendously helpful to employers, but I don't know that we're on the cusp of that happening. That being said, there are a number of services you can use. And those are like sort of private industry is popping up to fill that void. And I personally think it's a great thing. So I think of MEA, we partner with a very low cost unemployment comp provider who handles all 50 states and for a fee just takes care of any and all claims wherever they may arise. And it kind of takes that burden off the employer and allows someone else to do it and really kind of in that it's all they're doing, right? So they can do it extremely efficiently at a lower cost than if an internal person within an organization is trying to handle all that themselves. So I think we may see private industry kind of try to fill some of those gaps. And I'm seeing some of the, yes, that it's true. Learning a language is like that, and you're right. It is like learning a language in many ways. It's actually a great analogy. Thanks for sharing that. Also, of course, we get a lot of questions about the new administration and what is their focus going to be, and does that have an impact on this DEI space? And the answer is that the new administration is very focused on it. I say that because if you look through sort of the campaign website, the Biden campaign website prior to taking office, it was very clear that there would be a big focus on diversity and inclusion. So far, they're really using the tools that are already there. Right. So far it's been nothing. It's not this brand new requirement that they're imposing yet. But they have already asked the EEOC, for example, to make sure they're enforcing some of the decisions that came out during the prior administration from the Supreme Court that directly impact this space of DEI. So, for example, we have the Bostock decision that came out, I think it was January of last year, from the Supreme Court of the United States that said, look, we're going to resolve a split that's out there, sex, gender, identity. That's one term, gender identity. Sorry, I don't know why it came out as two. Gender identity and transgender status are all protected characteristics. Sex under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act includes sexual orientation. That was sort of their decision in that case. And the Biden administration has ordered the EEOC to step up enforcement of that and make sure that it's fully enforced in workplaces around the country. So you do want to make sure, take a look at your EEOC policies, make sure you have sexual orientation. You likely have gender or sex. Make sure you have sexual orientation, gender identity, and transgender status clearly identified as protected characteristics. They may not be there if you were following federal law before. If you were following Pennsylvania law before, they may not be there. And so you want to make sure they're in there. Other issue, unions, right? The new administration, big fans of unions, has stated an intention to focus on making it easier for employees to unionize and employee groups to unionize. One of the best ways to guard against union activity is with a very strong and engaging organizational culture, right? And it just so happens that those same principles that underlie a very strong and engaging organizational culture often align with diversity and inclusion. And they may be principles that don't come to mind straight away when you think of DEI. So for example, creativity. Do you ever think, do you often think, oh yeah, creativity and diversity and inclusion go hand in hand? But for organizations that have a focus on innovation and creativity, the principles that are behind innovation and creativity are those same principles behind diversity and inclusion efforts. So there really is a chance to just kind of bolster your organizational culture, which both helps create a more inclusive environment or maintain an inclusive environment, and helps guard against a feeling or employees feeling like they need to explore those kind of union avenues. Anything else? Comment section, Margaret, from the chat.
No, just one comment about how hiring really can be a crapshoot, and I think, that actually can be a good way to describe it at times.
Yeah, this is how to navigate the shoot. Yes.
And then let's see, we just got a quick question. Is there any value in doing a first screening for hiring in a Zoom or Teams venue without video to perhaps eliminate any impression of selection bias?
I think it's definitely an idea to consider, right? And maybe just, good old fashioned phone call, then you don't even have to say, we're not going to turn our cameras on, because folks, they will turn their cameras on sometimes, not even thinking twice about it. So I do absolutely think it's something to consider. It's right in line with ideas, and maybe not quite as severe as some folks remove names from resumes, remove addresses, just so there's no potential for those of us looking at the resumes to go, oh, they live right down the street from me. They must also be amazing like me, right? Just sort of that natural human inclination. Removing that so that those of us looking at those resumes are really focusing on what is their experience, what skill are they bringing to this position. So I think it's a great idea. It's like The Voice, and have a button, turn your chair around. I'm just kidding. All right, so now we are going to take a couple of polls, because I just shared with you what are some of the more positive things that we've been hearing, which is great. But there's also a bit of challenge. We've been hearing about some challenges, and that has centered around increased tension that some organizations have noticed among those in their workforce, and really trying to get to the bottom of it and find out what is the cause of this tension, right? Why are we seeing this when we haven't in the past? We've been sort of trying to guide some members through that process as well. So we're very curious about your responses to number one. It doesn't mean you have to say, yes, we've been having the tension, or, any particular answer. We just really want to know from those of us on this call, have you noticed an uptick in that? Have you noticed an increase in it? And if so, do you have a suspicion about where that tension may be coming from? And while you're answering the polls, I'm going to take a look at the chat. Yes, and we're not. I think I'm not suggesting you never see the person in person, right? It's a mix, and there really is some organizations have a very defined process about when we allow the subjectivity, let those subjective factors to come into play. And certainly, if, for example, someone said, "How could you tell, about their body language?" Right? Or things along those lines. I think, again, we have to keep in mind, if we're talking about diversity and inclusion, I think of myself even, and I'll share about myself, right? Oh, okay. If Christine, you can just put in, I thought they were going to be two separate polls. You can just put in for number two, F, and we'll know that F is sort of an answer that is invalid for our poll, right? But that means maybe either you didn't have, okay, perfect. That's what you did. Okay. But back to the question about seeing people in the interviewing process, even body language, even nerves in an interview, um, that may manifest in awkwardness or discomfort, right? Looking very guarded. That isn't necessary. I mean, we just have to give some thought to that. Doesn't mean the same thing for every person, right? Myself being someone whose parents didn't even go to college, right? And then I'm finishing law school at Penn and I'm interviewing with all these top law firms, and I am like, I'm so nervous. And I'm just doing what I'm trying to present myself in what I'm hoping will be appealing to them. It's not necessarily how I have been with my family and my friends, because that's a totally different world and different customs and different practices. It just day to day, moment to moment. And so what might manifest as awkwardness, or every now and then I'd hear, and I'm so curious if people think this, it's what makes you tick though? I remember getting that question in an interview, but what makes you tick? I'm having a hard time reading you. And I'm like, what do I say, right? It's just, I mean, I was so nervous because I thought if I share really about who I am or my family, I'm nervous that they're going to be off put by that. Little did I know there's a word for that, right? I'm nervous that their unconscious biases might come into play and really take things off course, and they won't focus on the fact that I'm so awesome and brilliant. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's how we all think of ourselves, right? So something to think about. All right, so let's take a look at this.
If I can just add there, while you take a moment to look at the polls, let me just, add another thought here for some of the comments in chat there. We're not saying don't do a Zoom interview. We're not saying don't have that face-to-face with the applicant. It's just recommended maybe for not the screening interview, right? First, to identify really, is this person a good candidate? That not having video on or doing it over the phone will allow you to remove some of those biases. And yes, if you have a bias as a hiring manager, that is something we all, right, have to work on, is overcoming our biases. And I think realizing and asking your managers maybe not to do it with the camera on or to do it by phone is raising the awareness for them that, hey, there's the possibility that you'll have a bias here. And we're trying to help prevent that by taking these measures. Just that level of awareness could help to reduce some of that bias.
Absolutely. Yep. So here are our results. This is so exciting just to see. So a little, a slight majority has noticed that tension, an increase in tension over the past 6 to 12 months, which is, and that does, I mean, that's consistent with us hearing from at least, some handfuls of members about this, right? And then we can all see sort of the results about what do we think this has resulted from. Some genuine disagreements about the best business and work ideas. To me, that does make total sense in this context of an entire new, for many of us, new way and new environment, new way of working and new business environment that we're trying to navigate. That maybe there's some really difficult issues popping up, and it takes a different set of skills than what maybe we were used to before to try and navigate that and to resolve kind of conflicts and disagreements, and to really sort of parse out, what are we disagreeing about? Why? What are the key factors we should be considering here? I think that's very legitimate there. Then we have almost a quarter of respondents here saying societal tension spilling over into the workplace, and that certainly happens as well. I think it's to some degree has become somewhat unavoidable. And it sometimes it's a matter of how attuned you are to it, though I'm sure there are some places with that strong culture that really is they are able to keep some of this tension out of that work environment. Margaret, the millennial issue, that's kind of one, I guess, that relates to this, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing and what we all know is that the millennials really have strong values. They want to express those values. They want to be somewhere that mirrors their values. But like I said, mainly, I think it is they do want to talk about it. It's a big part of who they are. So it is going to, it is showing up more in the workplace than it ever did before. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think of even, prior to MEA, in trainings I would deliver, when people would ask about these types, like sort of well, what happens if people get into a discussion about race or gender or politics or societal issues? And I would say, well, I like to follow the Thanksgiving table rule. Don't discuss race, religion, or politics at work, right? And I started to realize that I felt like that was insensitive of me, because, for example, people who are dealing with race every day because of the color of their skin and having their own unique experiences with it, they don't have the option to say, I'm just not going to think about race today, or I'm just not going to talk about that for a few months, right? But I've heard speakers recently even saying that rule has gone out the window, and I really think it's the millennials who who have said that rule is out the window, which does, it does create that opening for some of these things to pop up. So thank you for sharing with us, and I think that is very consistent with what we're seeing. I honestly was thinking maybe we'll see a 90% say no, right? And maybe only 10% will say yes, and maybe we're only hearing from people, who are having the issue. So I think that's great sharing there. Thank you everyone for doing that. And really that issue and those issues we just asked about really provide, they are challenges, but they provide some opportunities as well. And Margaret, shall I continue? I'm now forgetting, or did you want to speak about this slide?
No,
okay.
No, go ahead. You're fine, and I will
Okay.
just add in.
Okay. All right. So yeah. So there is so much alignment with that underlie diversity and inclusion efforts, and every single item that was in that multiple choice answer. Whether it is how to resolve conflict over business disagreements, right, over the strategy disagreements, basically how to deal with conflict in a healthy way, right? That's a big part of diversity and inclusion as well, because not surprisingly, issues around sort of our core identity they can create some conflict, right? If you have, Sienna the millennial saying, well, no, this is super important. I want to know what you're doing every day about DEI. I want to know what you're doing in our community. And you have someone saying, you need to pipe down. This is, that's conflict, right? And how do we resolve that in a healthy way, or at least acknowledge it and move on, right? In a healthy way. Also, values around respect, understanding, collaboration, creativity, teamwork, innovation, those all relate to diversity and inclusion as well. The statistics are out there. If you take a look at, for example, even Forbes, a lot of the material available on Forbes will point to, and Harvard Business Review, they are sharing results of research that shows companies that have focus on diversity and inclusion, they have higher levels of innovation and creativity. They have higher revenue than their similarly situated peer companies. Diversity and inclusion, it underlies that. It's a big factor in that ability to innovate and be creative, identify new markets, identify new ways of doing things. Because it means we're incorporating more diversity of thought, right? So big opportunities, big synergies here. And then skill building for employees in the space of diversity and inclusion. It's often the skills that all are directly tied to business growth as well. How to handle those difficult conversations, like I said, healthy ways of resolving conflicts, even team functioning, which is something Margaret handles, sort of like team building and how to have a well-functioning team, respectful communication, increased cultural awareness, because my goodness, that's something, especially for customer-facing employees, we don't want to have a misstep where someone who's very culturally unaware turns off customers, right? And results in a loss of business. And then finally, emotional intelligence, which is actually statistically tied to earning power. It's tied to your success within businesses, especially in management levels and above, and earning power. And so the same principles that underlie emotional intelligence, the biggest one being empathy, is a huge factor in how someone views inclusion in a work environment. So
And Sienna, let me just add here, if you don't mind, before you go on. And we are getting close to time, so we are going to have to move it along. But it's great to have these values and what Sienna was talking about, how they tie to DE&I. And I love that we have here the skill building as well on this slide with values, because so often organizations have values. But what they need to do also is make sure that their employees know how to live to those values or follow those values. Our most popular classes all involve communication at some point. So this is a skill that many people need support around. So look at your values, see what they are, and ask yourself, do our employees know how to really live these values? Do they know what they mean? And then do they need support in living them the way that will be best for this organization? And often it is that they might need support in the area of communications and in handling conflict, and with the emotional intelligence, which is really great news, because all of these things can be learned skills that can be developed and honed for, just better for everybody.
I think that, and that's an awesome part of this entire space, is a lot of these things are malleable, right? And that's another thing I love about this space. It's not, oh, you don't value inclusion right now, therefore you're a lost cause and no one ever, or you don't understand it, or, an employee doesn't understand this particular part of it. Well, forget it. They can't be here. These are all things that are skills that we can grow, which is an awesome thing. And really, I can't stress enough how focusing on that, on your values and your organizational culture, and really defining it and making it actionable for employees, like Margaret said, is a great way to just create that inclusive environment. You're going to lay the groundwork in doing that for an inclusive environment. And when tensions do pop up, employees then have some footing, right? Somewhere to ground themselves in how to handle, whether, it's that a conflict in a meeting that's arisen, or a genuine disagreement, some other issue, right, that maybe has seeped in from outside. They will be able to ground themselves in those values, and you will be able to hold them accountable to those values, right? So the values and the culture, invaluable in this space, really are. So it's that's my bit about that. Finally, I wanted to mention that we do have a 2021 DEI piece out. It's a free resource. It's available on the MEA website, and I believe we're going to be circulating it via email after this session. So take a look at that. And of course, if you ever have any questions, want to chat through something, Margaret and I are here.
Absolutely. And really, we talked about this the last time we met with you as well, and we used the whole travel agent theme, because we were talking about this being a journey. And really, it is a journey, and it's a tough one. Someone, said it's like learning a new language. And so when there is something like this that is really important, that you're a big change that you're bringing into your organization, sometimes it's helpful to have somebody else support you with that. So just some things here on the slide to think about when might be a good time to bring in a third party to support you with this.
Absolutely. And that's all from us today. Thank you so much for sharing, for everyone who typed in a comment, for answering those polls. Really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.